Nazi Germany had the Gestapo, Eastern Germany had the Stasi, and the USSR had the KGB. And now, in the once free United States of America, the left, as well as mainstream media, are calling for a secret police force in the United States of America, which I would dub an American Gestapo. Not only that, but we have leftists on social media now calling for Biden supporters to, well, watch and monitor Trump supporters and start turning in all of their content. No joke. This is above and beyond anything I have ever seen since I have been doing journalism. And this is going to cause a divide in our country like never before. And a country divided among itself will fall. And I believe those at the very top, you know who I'm talking about, know that. But before I get into the report, I just got to give a real quick shout out to my partner at hidewithlisa.com. Today is really the day and the time to get a VPN because look, Google and all these organizations are literally monitoring everything you look at over the internet. Well, it's none of their business. So that's what a VPN does. It acts as if you're searching off of a completely different computer. This is why I will not leave home without a VPN. So check it out at hidewithlisa.com. And I only use Virtual Shield because they get rid of everything within 24 hours. So get it today at hidewithlisa.com. All right, let's dive into what the left is now doing. Check out this article on Breitbart.com. The left is now calling for an army of citizen detectives to monitor and report Trump supporters. The article goes on. Many on the left are promoting a recent video created by a novelist and left-wing activist, Don Winslow, which calls on citizens to become cyber detectives to monitor and report fellow citizen Trump supporters to authorities, while comparing the work of this army of citizens to that which led to the capture of Al-Qaeda and founder Osama bin Laden. I mean, really? We're comparable to Osama bin Laden because we support freedom? That's really it. There's nothing to turn in regards to a Trump supporter. We have freedom of speech, and so does the left. But they go on to state, on January 20th, Trump will become the commander-in-chief of a different army. And this is on the video. The slightly over 2-minute video clip begins. The words, "This army," are then displayed as Trump supporters in Washington, D.C., and it flashes on the screen. Now, I touched on this in yesterday's video, but I really want to expand on it because there's so much more. But the article goes on to detail that on this video, the clip says, and I quote, "The greatest threat facing America today comes from within, radical extremist conservatives." You see how they're now labeling conservatives, and before they weren't, but now they are. Also known as domestic terrorists. They're hidden among us, disguised behind regular jobs. They are your children's teachers. They work at your supermarkets, malls, and doctor's office, and many are police officers and soldiers. Why are many of us police officers and soldiers as just regular conservatives? Because literally what he's doing here is calling out regular conservatives, saying you have to watch all conservatives because some of them might be radicalized or extreme. People have jobs as police officers because they got clean history. People have jobs as teachers who've had background checks because they're clean. But somehow, just for being a Trump supporter, you're put on that possible extremist list by the left. This is above and beyond. I don't see anyone doing the same with Black Lives Matter and Antifa members in these radical organizations. Nope. As the typical standard on Twitter and Facebook and social media, they get a free pass. But I move on. The video has received 3.5 million views. Why is that? Because the left organizations always push leftist videos to the top, but I digress. Then they claim that the president will begin a civil war. Wow. Once out of office, and that ordinary citizens must fight back. I've never heard President Trump push for a civil war. In fact, everyone I know is against it. We don't want anything like that because with civil war comes death and destruction. I don't want anything to do with it. But according to this video by this leftist, Trump's going to start a civil war. I mean, give me a break. And then he goes on, in the years ahead, Trump will lead his army of domestic terrorists. He will encourage and incite violence. Never has he incited violence. Never. He will start a civil war. Of course, this is a leftist radical opinion, but there's a lot of people jumping in and commenting on this thing. But later in the article, he goes on to propose a solution for all of this for all of these Trump supporters. I'm proposing that we form a citizen army, he says. Our weapons will be computers and our cell phones, who are monitoring extremists on the internet and reporting their findings to authorities. Basically, you're not going to be happy until every Trump supporter, every conservative is off the air. And that's literally what they're calling for, a silencing of one political side. And here's some of the people who are jumping in, making their own calls on this. But here's the original video. This is Don Winslow, the one who had put it out. And he says, I'm calling for an army of citizen detectives to fight Trump's new army of white supremacy. Will you help? Will you spread the word? Did this get degraded, downlisted by Twitter? No, it did not. Here's more here. This is Brooklyn Dad Defiant. Trump's new army is vile, and we know who they are. They are teachers, neighbors, police officers everywhere expose their treason. Again, this is a purposeful divide in our country. I don't see any conservatives saying that about liberals. They're not. And look, I'm a libertarian. Again, I'm going to make that clear. And yes, I've got some conservative views, but I'm highly libertarian. And that's not right. If this was happening to the left, I would call out the conservatives and vice versa. But here we are doing this. And this hasn't been taken off Twitter. Then we have Fred Wellman. Don is right. It's up to us. Do you love this country? Fight for it, he says. We can't let these insurrectionists and racists, take it from us, turn them in, fight for our democracy. This is why we're getting removed from multiple platforms. Here we have another one, Dana Grayson. On January 20th, Donald Trump will no longer be POTUS. He will be escorted out of the White House and lose control of the military. He will continue to lead his army of violent, seditionist arrests every traitor. 75, 8, 9 million some odd people in jail. Good luck. Literally, they're causing division. But what is truly going on here, and I'm going to read this one here because here's what he has to say about the video. He says, the video is diabolical, painting millions of citizens not only as disloyal to the nation, but as literal terrorists, as it attempts to draft the rest into fighting their neighbors in a civil war the filmmaker clearly desires. I stand with all patriots against this madness. And I have to say, I stand against such madness too. Whether you're on the left or right, you shouldn't be okay with calling for a spy grid where neighbor turns in neighbor, brother turns in sister, sister turns in mother, mother turns in father. Wait, you know how countries get defeated? They get defeated from within. And this is exactly what's happening in the United States of America. This is very diabolical, very diabolical. And our freedoms today are at risk. Today, more than ever before, right? Let me move on because I want to show you guys something else because I think this is important too. Here we have Breitbart.com. Swalwell says, Trump has radicalized followers the same way as bin Laden. Wow. Wait, what? And I've got a whole thing that I'm going to touch on the end of this video that Glenn Greenwald put out that is this. And I'm going to give you a piece of it, but you really need to listen through this at the very end because here's what Glenn Greenwald said, and I agree. Basically, you can assume, you no matter what you say, can incite violence, right? If I say, I hate Facebook, they should not be allowed to have their organization online. Or I hate Twitter and Twitter should not be allowed to have their company. That could, this is an example, that could incite someone to commit a crime. Anything could. I could say the Democrats are horrible people. And that could incite someone to violence. It never ends, right? There's a million things that you could say, and all of it could incite someone to violence. That's the stupidity of what we're literally facing and what they're doing to the president of the United States and what they're doing to Trump supporters, saying, oh, you can't talk about the election fraud because, well, that could incite somebody to violence, for example. Well, anything can. That's why we have freedom of speech, and it is lacking unlike ever before. You want to know how you lose freedom of speech? Under the guise of keeping everybody safe. That's the idea. But our founders knew that. But moving on, I want to get into this next article here. And this is on Can U.S. spy agencies stop terror? This was put out by the Daily Beast. And in this article, they actually are calling for the creation of a secret police force. But here's what the article says. Again, on January 6, years after numerous investigation and study commissions picked apart the intelligence failures leading up to September 11th terror attacks, last week, America's security agencies were again caught flat-footed when another kind of militant wave, this time pro-Trump fanatics, stormed and trashed the citadel of American democracy, nearly executing what Al-Qaeda failed to do. Democrats in Congress are tearing up another round of investigations and commissions to get to the bottom of the insurrection, which will almost certainly revisit the thorny question of whether the U.S. needs an independent counter-subversion agency to infiltrate and neutralize armed domestic extremists who are now threatening more attacks on or around the inauguration of Joe and Kamala Harris. But the article goes on and it states this. One response to the September 11th tragedy may well get renewed attention after the Capitol assault, especially if armed white nationalists are successful in carrying out more attacks in the coming days and week. And I quote, the call for a secret police. That's what they are calling for. A full-fledged secret police force. And I encourage you to read that article because it really dives into a lot of scary things. Again, this is the Gestapo for Nazi Germany, the Stasi for East Germany, the KGB, and the NKVD, if you will, for the USSR. And this is what they're asking for in the United States of America. I mean, does BuzzFeed realize that that's what they're asking for? And look, it's not those organizations are not one-sided. You see, those organizations only help one class, the class at the very top. And so they think this is just about their opposition. And that's called a useful idiot, where they think it's just one-sided. What they don't realize is eventually it'll be both-sided, because that's always what happens. We're not even living in a free country anymore. Anyhow, I want to show you this article here. But before I do, I want to remind you, get on over to restrictedrepublic.com. Look, this is why I created this, because so many things are happening in our country, and we're really going south. Patriots are being removed from platforms for talking about the election. We're being removed from insurances. We had the MyPillow guy recently, all his blankets and sheets and stuff got removed from Bed Bath & Beyond and also from Kohl's and other groups because he said there was election interference. And so they remove him for that. This is the kind of world we're in now. So I want to encourage you, now is the time to sign up on Restricted Republic. And look, right now, because of everything we're offering, one of our biggest monthly specials at $5 per month using the code TRUMP. You can get that special for an entire year. And you can see some of the amazing videos we have on there. Not only do we post brand new content, but we also post our YouTube videos there without any commercials. So check it out at restrictedrepublic.com. All right. So diving into this Glenn Greenwald report, and I also want to encourage you to read this entire report. Now, he's on the other side. He's more of a leftist, but he has some really good stuff sometimes. And this is a really good article by him. He says, the new domestic war on terror is coming. He said, the last 2 weeks have ushered in a wave of new domestic policy powers and rhetoric in the name of fighting terrorism, which I warned of, that are carbon copies of many of the worst excesses of the first war on terror that began nearly 20 years ago. The trend is showing no signs of receding as we move further from the January 6th Capitol riot. The opposite is true, and it's intensifying. We have witnessed of censorship from Silicon Valley monopolies with calls for far more aggressive speech policing, a visible militarized Washington, D.C. featuring a non-iron Cali named Green Zone, vows from the incoming president and his key allies for the new anti-domestic terrorism bill, and frequent accusations of sedition, treason, and terrorism against members of Congress and even citizens. This is all driven by a radical expansion of the meaning of the incitement of violence. And that's what I want you to hone in on. It's all driven, all of this newfound censorship, and it's not newfound, but explosion of more censorship and explosion of more programs here in the U.S. to weed out domestic terrorism. It's all hinging on the real expansion of the meaning of incitement of violence. And he goes on to expand on that a little bit. Much of the alarmist and fear-mongering is being driven by the deliberate distortion of what it means for speech to incite violence. The bastardization of the phrase was the basis for Trump's rushed impeachment last week. It is also what is driving calls for dozens of members of Congress to be expelled and even prosecuted under sedition charges for having objected to the Electoral College certification. And it is also the heart of the spat of censorship actions already undertaken and further repressive measures being urged. But he goes on. The phrase, and this is key right here, inciting violence, was also what drove many of the worst war on terror abuses. I spent years reporting on how numerous young American Muslims were prosecuted under new draconian anti-terrorist laws for uploading anti-U.S. foreign policy YouTube videos or giving rousing anti-American speeches deemed to incite violence and thus provide material support to terrorist groups. The exact theory which Representative Schiff is seeking to import into the new domestic war on terrorism. It is vital to ask what it means for speech to constitute incitement of violence to the point that it can be banned or criminalized. The expression of any political viewpoint, especially one that passionately expressed and has the potential to invite someone else to get so riled up that they engage in violence. And here's the kicker. If you rail against the threats of free speech posed by Silicon Valley monopolies, someone hearing you may get so filled with rage that they decide to bomb an Amazon warehouse or a Facebook office. If you write a blistering, screed accusation on pro-life activists of endangering the lives of many women by forcing them back into an unsafe back alley of abortions, or if you argue that abortion is murder, you may very well inspire someone to engage in violence against a pro-life group or an abortion clinic. If you start a protest movement to object to the injustice of the Wall Street bailouts, whether you call it Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party, you may cause someone to go hunt down Goldman Sachs or Citibank executives who they believe are destroying the economic future of millions. And then he goes on to give many other examples of how anything under the sun can pretty much incur some kind of violent action. And then he goes on to conclude with this. Despite the potential of all those views to motivate others to commit violence in their name, potential that has sometimes been realized, none of the people expressing those views, no matter how passionately, can be validly characterized as inciting violence. Amen. Either legally or ethically. That is because all of that speech is protected. It is legitimate speech. None of it advocates for violence. None of it urges others to commit violence in its name. The fact that it may inspire or motivate some mentally unwell person or a genuine fanatic to commit violence does not make the person espousing the views and engaging in that nonviolent speech guilty of inciting violence in any meaningful sense. And I say amen to that. He's speaking some real truth there, in my opinion. Just because you make a statement doesn't make you guilty of a crime of some freaking lunatic who wants to go out there and burn a building or bash in a window, right? That is what free speech is about. But there's a blind side in America that's not waking up to it all. Anyhow, I love all of you. Thanks again for tuning in. And again, get on over to Restricted Republic. I'm Lisa Haven, signing out.